can roll out your piece of silver clay and you can press your own fingerprint or a loved one's fingerprint straight into the clay. And this is perhaps the most direct method of taking fingerprints. And if you have a very cooperative older person, or you're fingerprinting yourself, or you really know what you're doing, then that can work very well. But often it doesn't go that way. There's a certain technique in pressing a fingertip straight down onto the surface of the silver clay, keeping it very flat and perfectly still, and lifting it immediately upwards. That's harder than it looks and harder to perfect than you think. I've known a lot of adults, and definitely I've known lots of children who dig their finger into the surface of the clay at the top or at the bottom, and then they spoil the fingerprint in some way or another. If you take a fingerprint impression directly into your silver clay, you will probably end up having to re-roll your silver clay and start over, maybe several times, which your silver clay won't like you doing a lot. If you have an uncooperative or overly interested wiggly squiggly little person, you could end up re-rolling your clay a lot, and then you'll end up putting your piece of silver clay straight into your scrap pot, which is just such a terrible waste of money. If you take your fingerprint in silicone impression material and make a mould, you can re-roll this silicone impression material around 3 times if your fingerprint isn't great, before you have to throw your piece of silicone into the bin. And even if you do have to throw away a piece of silicone, it's not the end of the world. It's a fraction of the price of your silver clay. 2, using a moulded fingerprint means you don't have to have the person being printed anywhere near you when you're working on your clay. You don't need to have the second person anywhere near your clay stage. So, all you do is take out a small ball from each pot. Now, you don't need very much. Think around the size of a garden pea. There we go. Now you're aiming for approximately 2 grams of each, but you don't really need to measure them. You can kind of just judge it by eye. Keep the ball separate to start off with, because as soon as the silicone touches, it will start to set. Make sure you don't get your blue into your white pot or vice versa, or else you will contaminate your pots and you will come back to them and find that the silicone inside the pots has gone hard. Once you have your 2 separate balls and they're relatively soft, working as quickly as you can, make sure they are thoroughly combined using your fingertips. You're aiming for a light blue uniform colour with no streaks. So you can see them combining, and you'll see when it's totally one colour. Once you can't see any more streaks, roll it into a smooth ball with no folds or cracks, and then you place your ball onto a hard flat surface. You can use a table or a small hardback book, or in this case, a small plastic credit card. There, pop it down in the middle. Then you quickly push your fingerprint onto the surface of the ball, trying to keep it completely flat. Then you lift the fingertip directly upwards in one single motion, like that. You don't have to hurry with the silicone at this stage, but it's probably not a good idea to rest the fingertip on top of the silicone ball for too long, because otherwise the fingertip could move and then you'll end up distorting the fingerprint anyway. Place your silicone fingerprint mould over to one side for around 10 to 15 minutes. You will probably notice that your package will say 5 minutes, but I always tend to leave it a little bit longer just to be safe. After the 15 minutes is up, you will find that the silicone still feels flexible, but it's set completely hard, like this one here. One tip that I find really works is it's much easier to fingerprint children when they're in a deep sleep. So you can take a small hardback book when they're asleep at night time next to their bed and take it while they're sleeping. But if you can't arrange that, ask the children to close their eyes, or at least look in the opposite direction when you're pressing their fingerprint into the silicone moulding compound, because it means you'll have a lot more control over the hand I'm still not entirely sure why that works, but it definitely does seem to stop them digging the tip of their finger into the silicone most of the time. Once your fingerprint is completely set, like this one, you need to take a little bit of olive oil or badger balm, and you need to apply the thinnest barrier layer over the entire surface of your fingerprint mould. So, tiny, tiny bit. Pick up the silicone fingerprint. Okay, you need to make sure you've gone over the entire fingerprint, but you're not using very much. And you also need to make sure you've gone around this edge bit, because otherwise you're going to mix up another lot of silicone and you're going to press it into this mould. And you don't want it sticking anywhere at all. So pop that down. Now we're going to take another small ball of the white and of the blue silicone. The balls can be smaller this time. You don't need to use as much as before. And again, make sure you don't get the blue into the white or the white into the blue. You need to use balls that are approximately the same size and just soften them up between your fingers first. So last time we had the size of a garden pea, this time we're thinking petit pois. Okay, so you've got the two balls like this. You combine them in exactly the same way as before, working as quickly as you can. It needs to be the same light blue uniform colour with absolutely no streaks. Once you can see that you've got a uniform colour, not quite, still a few streaks there. Roll into a little smooth ball, exactly like before, making sure there's no folds or pits or creases that will spoil your fingerprint. Now take your first fingerprint mould and press your second piece of silicone straight down into it. Try to cover up the whole of the fingerprint and keep it in an oval fingerprint shape, or your final fingerprint impression will look rather strange. And now you need to place this to one side for 15 minutes like you did before and let it set hard. Once it's set, you carefully remove the silicone that you pushed into the first mould, and you will see that you have a realistically shaped oval 3-dimensional fingerprint impression. Now this can be pressed into your rolled out silver clay, so you don't need the fingerprint tea to be present or anywhere near you when you're making your fingerprint necklace. You need to place your original mould into some kind of container to keep it clean and safe and dust-free. Silicone fingerprint moulds like this don't really deteriorate very much, but it's not a great idea to let them get dirty or damaged.